All right, here we are, guys, back at it again for another adventure in the Spooning a Bear book club. So, as Tori said, we're going to be doing, I think, chapters 12 through 15. And so I'm going to jump right in. And once again, before I get started here, just understand this is not a lecture, this is a conversation. So, as I'm going through some of these chapters and some of the experiences I had and lessons I've learned, anytime anyone has anything they want to chime in, question, comment, anything else, by all means, feel free to do it. You can put it in the chat, or if you're daring, you can unmute your microphone and you can actually talk to us. So we encourage that. We love that. So please, please join in anytime anyone feels the need or desire to. So with that, I'm going to jump right into chapter 12 of the Spooning a Bear book. And this chapter is titled Tough Love Cubs. And almost all the bear stories, adventures, whatnot I had working at the Bear Center are always feel-good stories, but some of them have really tough life lessons in there. And this is one such story. So what this chapter was about, the tough love Cubs, was I was working at the center. Obviously, we had already taken a few bears in, primarily from East Tennessee, whether or not as the Smokies or from the state of Tennessee. But the good thing is more and more people were learning about the Bear Center. So not just within the state of Tennessee, but nationally, especially the surrounding states. And so the neat thing that happened when I was working there is I talked about a call we received from Arkansas where they had a couple of cubs that they wanted rehabbed. At one point, I received this call from Denny Martin, who is the head bear biologist for the state of Virginia, and that's Denny pictured there. And when he initially called me up, he said he had three cubs for me that he was wondering if we could take in. And obviously, that's what we were there to do at the Bear Center. But the more I talked to him on the phone, I was beginning to get concerned because he had told me, "Hey Daryl, these bears are not normal bears. They've been extremely habituated. They're a little rambunctious, but they are completely comfortable with being around people. Somebody was feeding them. I don't think they had them in captivity, but they had them up on their porch or just really close proximity for a long, long time. So these bears were used to being fed by people." And so that scared me because we typically want to deal with wild bears and habituated bears or food conditioned bears were something that was we didn't really know what to do with. So after I spoke to Denny, I told him I couldn't give him an answer right away. I had to talk to a couple other folks. And obviously the big players back in my day were Kim DeLozier from Great Smoky Mountain National Park. He was my mentor. But also, we obviously have to work quite closely with TWRA, the Tennessee Wildlife Resources Agency. So I contacted the folks within both agencies and we had a discussion because typically we want to take in, rehabilitate, and release wild bear cubs. But these had that asterisk by it because they were so food conditioned. And so the idea was let's see if we can save these cubs by making them afraid of people again. And so, what that entails is making sure that they are not comfortable feeding or getting food from humans. And so, everyone agreed from the different agencies that we would like to do this to do whatever we could to try to save these cubs. And so we agreed. I called Denny Martin back and I said, "We'll take the Cubs and here's what we plan to do." And he thought it was a great idea. They had no other options for what to do with these Cubs. And that's kind of why the Bear Center was there, because there was very few options for state wildlife agencies when it came to orphan Cubs. And so Denny called me. We arranged that he was going to drive the Cubs down within a few days. And this was obviously when he first arrived. So we went down, we took the cubs, all three of the cubs, but they were fairly small. I think they were maybe 12, 10, 12 pounds. maybe a little bit bigger. But he brought all three of them in this little dog carrier. We took the cubs down into the main enclosure. And so this was a learning experience for all of us. And the thing that amazed me is Denny was able to reach in and grab one of the cubs. Now the cub wasn't real happy about being handled, but he grabbed one of the cubs. And so I had one of those spur of the moment, wow, that was really cool. At this point in time, I never really even touched a bear that was not sedated. So I asked if I could get the other one. And so I did. This is one of the funny thing about this picture. I grabbed this bear, and you can see he's not real happy. He was like a little Tasmanian devil while I was trying to hold him, and he was trying to get at me. And so the other volunteer that you saw pictured in there, she was taking the pictures, and she took this picture, and then she's like, "Oh, hold him closer to you so I can get another picture." And I will have you know, as soon as I brought that bear closer to my chest, he bit me so hard right right on my chest. I dropped him. He was okay. But I can now say that I've been bitten by a bear. I don't tell people that is only 12 pounds, but that was a life lesson right in and there that these ornery little bear cubs are not something cute and fun to play with most of the time. So anyway, that was pretty much one of the only pictures you have of me handling a cub without it being sedated or food conditioned or anything like that. So anyway, you can see here after we let the bears out, they were all three siblings. I forget the genders of them all, but at that time, the bear that bit me, I named him Tyson. Um, Back in the day, there was a boxer named Mike Tyson who became notorious because he bit the ear off another boxer. And so I gave him the name of Tyson for that reason. But the other one, Tuft, is the bear pictured on the left. His ears were this beautiful blondish color. So he had these tufted highlights in his on his ears. And then the third one, I'm not very original, so I named it Virginia. So we had Tyson, Tuft, and Virginia. Anyway, what the idea was with these cubs, you could see they were pretty rambunctious. They were playing, they wrestled like they were siblings, but you could see someone standing right there next to it. These cubs cared not that they're around people. They kind of just did not mind people being around. Typically, a wild cub would see a human get anywhere close to them, and boom, they are gone. They don't want anything to do with humans. And these cubs could care less. And that was more or less the issue or the problem with these cubs. And so, what we decided to do with these bears is a little research project where I was going to take care of them. You can see how small they are. So, we wanted to obviously get them up in weight and size so we could release them back into the wild. And so, we had to pack on 30 or 40 pounds. So, they were going to be with me for at least a couple of months. And the plan was whenever I would go down to feed the bears, if they would come near me or anything, I would scare them away. I wanted to make it uncomfortable so they didn't like being around people. And so the very first time I let them acclimate in those larger pens for a couple of days. And then we had to get hot and heavy on trying to save these cubs using this term called aversive conditioning, in which you try to scare the animal if it comes too close to you. And so what I would do is we had all that blind material around the pen. And even though the bears couldn't see me when I initially walked down, they could hear me, they could smell me. And so the three cubs would always walk over to where I was because they were okay with being around people. And so the very first time, and I remember it as clear as day, I lifted the blind material so the cubs could see me, and instead of running, they kind of walked over. That it's like, oh, there's a human. That's what we're supposed to go to. And so what I did is I purchased a high pressure water hose. It was just a garden hose type variety. And so when they walked over to me, if they approached me, I would spray them with the hose. And when I'd spray them, they would run away. And so that was exactly the response we were looking for. And so every day I go down, I would show myself so they could see a human. And if they tried walking over, I would spray them. If they didn't, they wouldn't get sprayed. Here's the problem. When you live in Tennessee, in the summertime, it tends to be really, really hot. So it can get up to 95 degrees, even approaching 100 degrees sometimes. That high pressure water hose was a nice ice cold water. And so after a few weeks, they learned that if they walked over to me and I was going to spray them and get them wet, it would feel good. So they're like dancing in the spray, loving getting sprayed. Like, oh crap, this isn't going to work. So then I had to use different techniques to try to scare them. So the next thing I used, we had that case of bear spray up in the center. So I didn't like doing it, but this was for the bear's benefit. So if they walked towards me, I would give them a shot with the pepper spray. Understand it's very, very uncomfortable, but it does not hurt. It does not permanently hurt them. It stings them. It'll wear off. And so I used that a couple of times, and I found out that if you spray it into the wind, you'll soon feel what those bears are feeling. And so I ended up spraying myself a few times. And so I didn't have much of the bear spray. It did work, it was effective. So they would run when I had the bear spray. Other tactics we used, like I would actually go into the pen and it was a cattle prod, and it just gave them a little zap. It was about the zap that you'd get from an electric fence. And again, if they tried approaching or got too close, I could give them a zap on their butt and they would run away. We also kind of chased them away with some dogs to make sure they weren't too comfortable around dogs. I even went to the store and bought fireworks because I wanted to scare them with loud bangs and things like that. So I threw everything but the kitchen sink at them for a couple of months to make sure these bears had every chance in the world at surviving in the wild. And so a few months went by, kept using the aversive conditioning. And just so you know, we did publish a little research poster for this project that we ran. And so after a couple of months, I called Denny Martin. I told him the cubs were large enough to be released. And so he scheduled to come down and visit and see what was going on. And so we talked about it a little bit, and I said, I'm going to let you make the call, Denny. And so we went down into the bear pen. And at first, I think I had the cattle prod, and myself and Denny walked into the bear pen with these three cubs. And it was awesome. It was one of the greatest feelings because all three of those bears just shot right up to the top of the tree. And Denny was ecstatic. He's like, I could not be more happy with what has happened here. And I told him, hold on, don't get too excited just yet. And so I told him to stay there, and I walked outside and I put the cattle prod away and I walked back into the pen. And I was crossing my fingers praying they wouldn't do it. But unfortunately, when I came back in, the cubs saw me and Denny standing there and they started coming down from the tree. And slowly but surely, they worked their way over all the way to literally at our feet. And the one was nuzzling up to Denny's boot. And he's like, this isn't good. And I knew that wasn't good. That was the bad news I had for him. And what we learned in this process was bears are really smart. We know bears are really smart. And when it comes to the aversive conditioning, it's so, so difficult to change a bear's behavior once it's ingrained. And what these cubs learned over the course of a few months, they learned that a human was okay. A human with a can of bear spray was bad. A human with a cattle prod was bad. A human with a high pressure hose was bad. They learned that if that human was carrying something in their hands that could like hurt me or make me run away, I'm gonna run away. But if that person doesn't have anything, that human is my friend. And so it was a tough lesson to learn. And so Denny took the cubs back to Virginia and tried to find homes for those bears. They could not be released back into the wild. So that was what we learned. I should have clicked the picture forward, but like I said, they would skirt up the tree whenever you had that implement that would scare them. But unfortunately, you put that implement away and you just stood there. They were beyond the point of being able to reverse their behavior. So unfortunately, we learned a tough lesson. But the best thing about this is we learned. We like I said, we created this scientific poster that talked about this event and to inspire more research into it. But it was a pretty unique experience, a great learning opportunity, and so that was what chapter 12 was about. So, any questions about those cubs from Virginia? And that
Hey,
goes
Daryl.
to Tori and Greg too.
Yeah, Daryl. Sorry, I just joined a little late there as you're and then I was busy taking care of my goats
That's all right.
out here. But yeah, I know we talked when you were visiting about aversive conditioning stuff, and I love hearing people speak truthfully about the effectiveness of it because at this workshop we were just at up in Montana, we had a biologist there from Colorado who was saying, hey, we just got to admit that when bears already develop some of these strong conflict behaviors, that there's no aversive conditioning your way out of these behaviors, and you got to give bears more credit. Everyone says bears are smart, but I feel like people don't get into the deeper thinking of associating that experience with just the tool and not the human. You'd think that you could get them to associate the cattle prod, the bear spray, anything, paintballs, you name it, with humans. But anybody who's worked in the national park and had to haze a bear out of a picnic area or campground, you can chase it off. But you also know when you're not there, that bear's around 100 people without a care in the world who don't have that implement or tool to chase them off.
I don't know what I clicked on, but I can you see that question? Was he able to find places for them? I don't know how that.
Oh, find places for them. Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. I don't know how that came up there, but yeah.
Yeah, that's
yeah,
weird.
I might have clicked on something. Well, I don't know. Anyway, let me address that next. But yeah, Greg, you know Kim Delosier, and Kim Delosier was the head biologist of Great Smoky Mountain National Park for a while, and he came up with this scale of more or less when a bear gets to the point of no return. And so when they start developing bad behaviors, oftentimes they're extremely, extremely timid. They'll come into maybe a human developed area under the cover of night and they'll explore around. When they're in that point, they're terrified. They are exploring new territory and they don't know what dangers exist. And so if you can apply any type of aversive conditioning and nip it in the bud right away, that could absolutely save a bear. But it goes along this progression where, okay, it starts coming in at night, there's no negative consequences. And then so it starts coming in, it becomes a little bit more bold. Sometimes they come in at the first light or in the evening. And it goes all the way to this progression where Kim would call it, they become day active. So they will actually go into picnic areas, campgrounds, right in the middle of the day when the people are there. At that point in time, even Kim would say that that bear is pretty much long gone. It is very difficult to change that bear's behavior. So um, yeah,
Yeah.
it's a tough thing. There is hope, but it's a quickly closing window when it comes to when you can actually save that bear.
Yeah. And I think that just speaks to the need for the bear proofing measures. Some people think that you can just haze and aversively condition your way out of some of these issues. And you just need to say, like, hey, there's nothing you're going to do. If there's open trash available, if there's bird seed available, those high quality food rewards, you're not going to haze your way out of that behavior if those things are so readily available.
Right. Um, there we go. Okay, now to that question was, were they able to find homes for them? Then he took them back to Virginia, and I know one of the cubs ended up in a sanctuary, I think in New Hampshire, somewhere in the Northeast, and the other two cubs, unfortunately, and, you don't like to say it, but they cannot be released and they could not find homes, and so they ended up putting they could not run the risk of that bear growing up and then becoming like, can you imagine that the cub was 30 or 40 pounds and was more than willing to walk over to us and literally begin nuzzling us at our boots. Now, can you imagine that being a 300-pound bear in the wild? So, as much as we all hate those decisions, I completely understand those decisions simply because it's way too dangerous for the bear and for obviously for humans as well. So, um,
Hey, Daryl. I think that's just a good point to talk about briefly if you have insight in terms of just why it's so difficult to place them somewhere long term. Like, do you have any insight in terms of like what zoos requirements are? You know, because a lot of questions we get are like, well, can't just any zoo take them? And it's really, really difficult actually to try and find permanent
I
placement.
think no, that is such a great point that we should make, Tori, because I think people are perplexed. Oh, why don't you just send them to a zoo?
Hmm.
Okay, I wish we were live and in person because I'd ask the audience here, how many people have a dog or multiple pets? And then someone comes up to you and says, "Hey, can you take in three more dogs?" It's like, no,
Like my house.
yeah, and like pet owners, it's like, no, I've already got enough that I can't handle more. Now think about zoos. There's only one or two zoos per state. And those lots of zoos don't even have the setup to take a bear in. They're a class one animal. So it's not like you're taking in a flamingo or something.
Hmm.
These are bears. And so there's a lot of zoos that aren't set up. So that narrows that pool down. And then most zoos that have bears, when they get a bear in, that bear is going to be with them 20 years. And they don't have the capacity to take more animals. And so it is a long shot, extremely long shot to find a zoo that is willing to take a bear. We were lucky, and it took a long time. We were lucky to place a couple of them, but there's no way we can, like, all these unreleasable bears. We just can't find places for them because there's nothing out there throughout the whole country. Very good point, Tori.
Yeah.
All right, any other questions? All right, so I'm gonna go on to chapter three, Houdini's Holiday Surprise. Believe it or not, folks, like my memory's going. I didn't even remember this story until a number of years ago. I was talking to Dana Dodd, and she told me that she ran across a bunch of old newsletters that I used to write back in the late 1990s, and she sent them to me, and I was reading through them, and it spurred my memory of this one situation that occurred. It was around it was around Christmas time. And back then, I was the only employee at the Bear Center. And so anytime that I wanted, me and my wife wanted to go away for vacation or holiday or anything to visit family, we had to get volunteers to come in and watch the Bears. Now, can you imagine being a volunteer and getting a call and say, "Hey, can you come in and spend Christmas Eve and Christmas Day sitting bear sitting the cubs over here?" It was really, really difficult to find quote unquote bear sitters. And so we swallowed that pill, like, all right, we'll be here and we'll have our own little Christmas here. And we did that, but we were able to get people to begin watching the Bears on September 26th and through the New Year's. And so we got everything ready, made sure we had enough like food, everything lined up for when that first sitter came the next day. So it was Christmas Day, and it was towards the evening, and it was like, all right, I'm gonna go down there, check on the Bears one last time before I'm gonna hit the road early in the morning. And I walked down there, and all the cubs, I forget how many cubs we had. We had a handful of cubs. And I remember looking up in a tree, and there's three cubs up in a tree. Houdini was one of them. I can't remember the other two. I think it's in the book. But as I'm looking at him, I'm getting ready to walk back up, and all of a sudden I hear a big crack. And I look back and the tree that they're in starts falling over. And I'm like, I just could not believe what was happening before my eyes. And believe it or not, that tree was right near the fence line of that one enclosure. And so as the tree's falling, it's gonna fall on top of the fence. My first thought was, I hope the bears are okay. But then, secondly, it's like these bears are going to fall outside of the fence. And so, as I'm watching in disbelief, the tree fortunately got hung up on its way down, and it came to a jarring halt. And one of the bears, Houdini, like was almost shaken out of the tree and was just hanging on for dear life. And as soon as the tree kind of settled down, the other two bears kind of like realized the situation they were in and they scampered down the tree. But Houdini did not realize the situation it was in and more or less stayed up in that tree. That is actually a picture of Houdini. You can see she had a slightly shaved back end from when she had the surgery to fix her leg. Anyway, she did not realize, and she hunkered down in that tree that was perilously close to falling onto the fence. And so after after my wits came back to me, I'm like, oh my gosh, I got to do something. So here it is, Christmas Day in the evening, and I've got this tree falling with a cub in it. And so fortunately, we Tom Faulkner, if you don't know him, he's been with the Bear Center for 30 some years. He's an amazing person. I was able to call Tom Faulkner and I'm like, Tom, you got to help me. And I told him the situation. And so he made some calls. He knows pretty much everybody in East Tennessee. He made some calls and he was able to get a tree service company to come out and secure the tree at least so it wouldn't fall. By this time, it was dark. And so they secured the tree so it wouldn't fall any further. And they assured me everything was going to be okay. Tom Faulkner assured me, he's like, you don't have to cancel your holiday plans. We'll take care of this. And so the next day, they waited till the next day till sunrise to work on the tree to make sure the cub was safe. Fortunately, in the morning when they went back down, the cub had already come down, realized it wasn't probably a good tree to stay in, and they were able to clear that tree from falling on the fence. So totally forgot about that unique situation, but that goes to show when you work at the Bear Center, you gotta expect the unexpected. Especially, it's not just the Bear Center, but whenever you are dealing with wild animals, that's the first thing you got to get through your mind. Expect some unpredictable situations, and that's what makes the best biologist is how you can react in situations like that. So I don't know if my standing there with my jaw down was a great reaction, but we were able to make sure all the cubs made it out okay. So any questions about Houdini's holiday surprise? It was a surprise.
Um, I was gonna say, Daryl, I don't know if you remember hearing about the bears that got out by a tree falling back in 2016, winter. It was like January of 2016. It was when I worked at ABR in the winter between my seasons in the Park Service, and there were two female bears who we were actually trying to catch to release back to like Johnson City area. And I remember everyone called them Thelma and Louise after they escaped. I forget what
Yeah.
their actual names were.
I think one was
Some followers
Bailey,
here might remember
maybe.
them, but no, Bailey escaped through the food wheel when I was
Oh,
there. She escaped, and there were two females. It was the same January. Bailey did go through the food wheel and then ended up back in Townsend, and then came back like 2 days later. We caught her back, but there were two females that were supposed to be released, and this cedar tree fell in a windstorm and perfectly leaned across the electric and barbed wire of the upper part of the fence, and they let themselves out. The only difference was they were supposed to be released to Johnson City area
Yeah.
and not in Townsend. But what's funny is they had yellow ear tags. They were some of the only bears that ever had yellow ear tags. And a woman sent us a picture of a female bear with cubs up near Johnson City. It is, I think, I want to say more close to Elizabethton area. and she sent us a picture of a female bear with yellow ear tags that were those ear tags last year with two cubs, and we can only assume it's one of those two females who were self-released in Townsend and then made their way
That
all the way actually back home.
that would be amazing. If man, if there is any way to verify that, because that's quite a
Oh,
haul.
I know it. It was well. I can tell you for sure that those bears were they were seen in Tremont because, like I said, they had these little yellow plastic ear tags, and no other bears had those because they were using different colors for bears from different counties,
Yeah,
and the only females who would have had those should have been those bears.
yeah,
And I saw the picture the lady sent, and it looked very much like those little yellow ear tags, and there really was no reason there should have been another one. Oh, Cindy Lou and Belle. That's what Gene says here. Okay, thank you, Gene. Yeah, Cindy Lou and Belle were their names, and this woman, she swears they were, yeah, like, because the picture it looks yellow, but some of the green ear tags can look kind of yellow as they feed over time. The light and stuff can degrade, but I'm pretty sure they're yellow. So that's the only other female besides a bear who lives on Laurel Falls Trail, who I know has had three litters of cubs since we rehabbed her in 2016, that I suspect of confirming reproducing in the wild. Um, that has been rehabbed at ABR. So, but that they were self-released, as we like to say, when the cedar tree across the fence. The good thing was they were the only two in that pen at the time, so wasn't the worst end of the world.
yes. The self-releases or spontaneous releases are literally a fact of life. I was so relieved because I thought I was the only one that was screwing up, but I'm so relieved to hear that
Yeah,
you guys had that too. Because I did have a couple other bears. Understand when I was there, I was telling Tori before we started. Excuse me. We had no cameras, no anything. I just had to go
right.
physically multiple times a day to observe the bears. And I had two cubs that I went down, never found them again. Don't know how they got out, but they were gone. Went into the enclosure after a couple of days. Now I went a number of days without seeing bears because they would hide, get into something and stay there, especially if it was late fall, winter time. But these bears like never showed themselves after a week or two. And so I went in there, searched all over, and then I made the call. I'm like, we don't have these bears anymore. No idea how they got out or anything like that because we didn't have cameras. But I'm glad I'm
Yeah.
not the only one where bears spawn
Oh,
is released.
yeah, the food wheel bear, Gene, you're right. That there was a bear who got through the food wheel, but Coy was able to recapture him in the perimeter. Bailey bear went through like where there was some gravel next to the food wheel. The food wheel was locked, but she dug some gravel out of the way. Tom quickly, as you had mentioned, Tom Faulkner knows everybody. He got a welder over there the next day and welded a piece of metal and where this little hole was that this 10-pound yearling got out of.
Yep.
But yeah, shout out to Tom Faulkner. He knows everyone in East Tennessee, like Daryl said, and he can find somebody really quick to do whatever you need. If it's
Yep.
concrete, tree work, you name it. He makes calls, and we're blessed to have him around. So
Yeah. That's
definitely big help for 35 years.
yeah.
And
And
Daryl, I was
then
wondering, you saw the perimeter of the new area.
yep.
Go ahead.
Well, no, I
Oh,
was just
sorry.
gonna say
I'll get my.
you mentioned about like just a small area where those bears can get out. Remember when they hibernate, they will crawl in the tiniest of crevices. So in order to keep a bear in, like these enclosures have to be pretty escape proof. And unfortunately, you learn by trial and error. If there's a little gap, they're gonna find that little gap that they can get out. But I will say everyone's done an amazing job to make sure that we've got a pretty good track record when it comes to keeping bears in. It's not a perfect track record, but it's pretty darn good. So, all right, Greg, sorry. I just want to
Yeah. Well, I was gonna say you saw the new perimeter of the new area down below. Did Seth show you that?
yes,
You may have noticed there's probably about 25 feet between any tree and the new fence, and I made that decision like, hey, we're gonna not have to worry about
trees
any of
falling.
these trees. So that new area, you guys have seen some pictures of it. Daryl got to take a look at it, and It's over an acre, and divided into halves, and there's quite a significant buffer between the first trees and the fence. So we've got a good mixed habitat that should grow up in there, and I'm really excited for it. But more importantly, I'm excited to not have to worry about trees falling on the fence from the inside or outside. I joke with Tom a lot. I say, Tom, why did you let these trees be here? He's like, well, they weren't that big when we first built the fences.
Yep.
And now there's some trees that are pretty big and they're right next to the fence. So um, live and learn, trial by error.
Yes. Um, so the cool thing with this, like I'm not showing all my life lessons, but Houdini did reiterate a life lesson that I'm always telling people is the most memorable times in our lives are usually when things don't go right. Think about it. When you have a Christmas where the meal was wonderful, the presents were good. I hate to say it, but it's pretty forgettable. But when Uncle Tom spills wine like all over the table or sets the Christmas tree on fire, you're going to remember that Christmas more than any other one. Same thing when you go on vacation. Lots of vacations are awesome, wonderful, but it's the ones you remember the most is when the car broke down in the middle of nowhere and we had to call a tow truck at 2 in the morning. That's going to happen in life. That is part of life. And just remember when things go wrong, embrace it and cherish it because that's what makes the memories in your life. So, anyway, great life lesson there from Houdini himself. All right, that's going to take us to chapter 14. This will be hopefully a relatively quick one because I want to spend a bit more time on chapter 15. But a bear scene is literally just another story of a really cool event that happened while I was working at the Bear Center. This was a picture of what the outside enclosure used to look like when I was there. We have this blind material so the bears didn't see us feeding them and everything, but that's that double perimeter fence. And so I had a couple of bears on site. There are actually larger bears that we had for a short period of time. And I went down towards the late evening to feed the bears. And this was kind of my vantage point. I took down a couple of large buckets filled with like berries, blueberries, strawberries, you name it, dripping wet because they're kind of a little past their prime from the grocery stores. I remember even having a bucket of fresh trout guts and heads and skins that we get from the Tuckaleechee Trout Farm. And I went down to feed these bears. And so I got there, I slopped everything over the enclosure, and it's starting to get dark. And so when you're down in Townsend in the middle of the woods by these bear pens and it starts to get dark, sometimes it gets dark and the scene kind of changes on you. And so it was like this. It was getting really, really tough to see. You just had moonlight. And as I was locking up the enclosure to head back up to the trailer, I noticed the bears inside the enclosure. They didn't immediately go to start feeding. They were just pacing back and forth. Something was agitating them, and I'm like, "What the heck is going on?" I never saw them like that, but I understand enough about bear behavior that pacing. They were really disturbed at something, and I was trying to figure out what was there did like another bear get in the enclosure? Because we're designed to keep bears in, not keep bears out. And with one of the larger adults, she may have attracted, it's summertime, so maybe she was in heat. So I'm starting to get a little freaked out because now it's almost dark. So I'm like, I better head up back to put these buckets back in the maintenance building and go back to the trailer. Now, this is what it probably looked like in my mind. This is what I was picturing because it was really, really hard to see in that area. But I knew my way around. You could see enough that you could see the path to go back up to the maintenance building. So I locked up the gate and I'm carrying these two 5-gallon buckets dripping with berry juice and fish guts. And as I locked up the enclosure, I hear a If you've ever heard that, you know exactly what that sound is. It's the sound of a bear huffing, and it sounded like a big bear huffing. The problem was it didn't come from the inside of the enclosure where my bears were. it came from the woods where I had to walk through. So I knew there was a bear there. I'm like, okay, this bear's giving me a warning. I know he or she's not really interested in me, so I'm just gonna walk straight line back to the maintenance building, get rid of these dripping buckets of deliciousness. And so I walked. Put it this way, my butt was clenched the whole walk back up there, but I eventually made it back. Did not hear or see anything in my walk in the pitch black, but I made it back up to the maintenance building. And up there we have a couple of outdoor floodlights, so you could see better now that I was back by the buildings. And so I put the buckets away, washed them out, put them back up, I locked up. And I went in, and I told my wife at the time, "Hey, there's a bear out here. I've heard it was really close, but I never saw it. I have no idea what kind of bear it was, like how big it was or anything." Said, "I'm just gonna sit outside." We had a little fire pit there. I'm gonna sit outside. You can see a lot more, is more much more clear. I just wanted to see what bear was around the bear center because back then I didn't see bears outside of the pens too much. I know there's a lot more bears now than there was when I was there. I really wanted to see this bear. So I was sitting on the bench for a couple of minutes, just waiting to see what made that noise down in the woods here. And so I waited a little while, and all of a sudden, my wife came in the door and said, "Get your butt in here." I'm like, "Why? What's going on?" And she said the neighbor had just called, and a bear tried getting up on their porch. And my neighbor at the time, the Murphys, wonderful, wonderful people, they had a big black lab, Clyde, who was a wonderful dog, weighed 130 pounds. He was huge. And the neighbor Marge said the bear that got up on the porch was 3 times the size of Clyde. Thankfully, Clyde barked enough that the bear ran away. But 3 times the size of a 130-pound animal, it's going to put that bear well over 300 pounds. And so, as soon as I heard that, that's where like the tingling in the back, because that bear was so close to me, I couldn't see it. He was huffing at me because I was in his territory. Again, they don't want to engage with humans, and I don't want to engage with a bear. But he was just warning me, leave him alone, and I obviously did, and he left me alone. But that was one of the coolest experiences. Not particularly when it was happening, but after it happened, it was like, wow, that was pretty amazing. So, has anyone, especially for Greg that works a lot with bears, ever have like a really close encounter with a big with any kind of bear? They're like, "Ooh, that was close."
Um, yeah, I have a story of trying to chase a 400-pound bear out of an area in Cades Cove before, and you get really overconfident chasing bears away. It's your job to run them off the road, and you get so used to like, hey, if I just I used to be bigger when I was done playing college football. I was a pretty stout guy, and I thought most bears are smaller than me. More, I'm big and aggressive. I got a beard, and I would run a lot of 200+ pound bears off easily. But I've run at a 400-pound bear before, and it starts running, and then it just stops and it stands up like bows up on me. And I my same thing with you. I tell people you get this like monkey brain kind of instinct where your skin, it starts tingling in the back, and you're like, you know what, that thing's bigger than me. And I just now I feel like the like submissive animal in this situation. I was never afraid. I mean, I was overconfident. I would run at any bear because I knew the more
We lost them.
Yeah, he was having internet issues
Yeah,
earlier
it
with the
was it was a
storm.
little laggy. I'll finish his thought. The one thing you don't want to do is become overconfident because that's when mistakes happen. But oh, there you are.
I'm back. I'm back. Yeah, I would rent a bear, and anyway, this 400-pounder stood up on me, and I just tell people, I'm like, it's real easy to feel comfortable and confident around average sized black bears and even smaller ones, but a 400-pound animal is a big animal, no doubt about it. Any animal is 400, and when a bear tells you no, especially when it has the you feel that instinctive, I'm just a human. I'm soft. I'm made of flesh that's not that durable. I'm gonna back down, and maybe I'll go get a paintball gun and use that.
Oh, I think he's off again, but something, Daryl, that you mentioned the blowing noise, and it reminded me of your first story with those cubs and how I think they came in May, is what it said in the book. Um, the coolest thing is when we get like a bear in March and they're so small and they just have that innate, if a human is nearby, they blow. And it's like it's this
Yeah.
small, tiny cub. How do they? But it is just really, it's an instinct and it's natural. And so the fact that, those ones from your first chapter we talked about
Yeah.
tonight just kind of walked right to the people is a huge red flag for
Yeah.
sure.
And the one thing I will tell you when it comes to bear behavior, and most biologists will reiterate, like you can learn to read a bear and have a good feel of what it's going to do. You can never ever trust a bear. Just like Greg was saying, like it turn around and boat up on them, and you don't expect it. So you can never, with 100% certainty, predict what a bear's going to do. But the cool thing is, you can get it right most of the time, and that is the most unbelievable confidence boost for like anyone hiking in bear country when they see a bear and they kind of think what's going on and that bear does what they think it's going to do because they learn from a lot of these classes. It's empowering in that, hey, I can deal with these situations. And I always tell people when you go into bear country, the number one tool you carry is not going to be bear spray or a firearm or anything. It's your brain. And if you understand what bears are likely to do, it is such a confidence builder. And I've had a number of people say, I enjoy hiking so much more because I'm not scared out of my wits when I see a bear. I kind of understand what's going on now. So anyway, pay attention,
Yeah.
folks.
Yeah,
It,
you look really cool. I'm back if you can hear me. You look really cool in front of a group of tourists if you tell them what the bear wants to do and it does what you
yeah,
said. But then when it doesn't do what you said, you just like, yep, there you go. It's a bear, unpredictable, you
yep,
know? But when you get really good at catching bears and darting them especially, you get really good at reading their movements and behaviors because you're basically, stalking them and you're like, hey, I think he's gonna walk over here. And 90% of the time when you've done it a couple hundred times, you're good at it. But there's still times where they trick you,
oh,
and
yeah,
maybe on purpose. Maybe they're just smarter than you. They're watching you and they're playing off of you, and you're just the less savvy predator because we're just visitors in their environment. They live in it all day, every day, and they know how to maneuver in the woods better than we do. When you get the upper hand on a bear, you feel really clever. You're like, I'm the superior primate. It's like you think like I just beat you at evolution, but then while you're sleeping, a bear beats you at your game and gets out of your fence.
yeah.
So yeah, lesson.
They will definitely humble you. So, okay, I am going to move on to the last chapter because I want everyone to put on their nerd hat again because I'm about to. Chapter 15 is going to be one of those chapters where I try teaching you. Last time we talked, I kind of went off the beaten path to do a little biology lesson where we talked about hibernation. And I'm going to do it again today with chapter 15, which was titled Making Cubs, because bears can do some amazing things. And the way that cubs are born is pretty neat. It's pretty crazy. And much to the chagrin, they're not delivered in little neat stork stuff packages that a bird delivers. And just so you know, that is Dr. Mike Pelton. He was the one that pretty much wrote the book on a ton of scientific material that we know about bears today. He conducted one of the longest ongoing black bear studies primarily in East Tennessee, but throughout the Southeast. So, how cubs are made is actually a super interesting biology lesson. So, to get started, I just want to refresh your memory from the last time we talked, where I talked about hibernation. And so, if you recall the one graphic I had towards the end, it kind of talked about why hibernation is so amazing. What bears can actually do physiologically that just separates them from so many other hibernating animals. And so I had a number of facts about it. But the one thing I want you to look here is bears emerging from their den may have lost 30% of their body weight. It's almost all fat. That's a really, really cool thing. But they lose a ton of weight. They pretty much go on this month-long diet where they're barely eating. So let's talk about making cubs and pregnant females. Stick with the mammal world. Let's just talk about humans. So, how many pregnant women do you know starve themselves? Pretty much every woman I've ever known that was pregnant goes on eating binges. They just eat a ton because now you always hear it, they're eating for two. And so we got to figure something out because pregnant females, if they hibernate, that's going to be a real problem on their body if they're trying to nurse cubs that are growing within their womb as they're hibernating. It's not going to work unless there's some neat, neat little tricks that happen. So, what I was going to talk about is how cubs are born. And so, we're going to start here and talk about these young bears. But truthfully, that bear is a little too old. That's probably even a yearling. So we'll go back in time a little bit to much smaller cub. But even this bear is a little too big. So let's go to a little 5 pound bear. But you know what? That one's already out of the den. Let's go to those neonatal type of bears. That's what I was gonna start with, but then it's like, all right, to teach this lesson, we're gonna go back to when that cub was just a thought. And so what I'm talking about there is the black bear mating season. And so for those of you that don't know, the black bears, especially in East Tennessee and the Southeast, they well, pretty much all across North America, they mate in late spring, early summer. So around that June time, even um, for a month or two, they'll be in this behavior where they will end up mating. And so, what happens when a male bear and a female bear get together and they get those thoughts of Barry White playing in their mind and they mate? Y'all know that when a female's egg gets fertilized, you're going to be having a baby soon. And so, upon that initial fertilization, which may take place in June sometimes, as soon as that fertilization takes place, when you have mammals, it immediately begins to grow. And then it starts growing, and those cells divide, and it's literally a train rolling down the track with um, that embryo continuing to grow. And so it keeps dividing, dividing. And if you don't stop it, that bear would probably hold on to those cubs. They're about the same size as humans. So they would probably have an 8 or 9 month pregnancy. But what happens is right at the very beginning, as that embryo starts dividing, the bear's body calls a timeout. They don't do this intentionally, but physically, inside that mother's uterus, those those eggs stop growing, and they're more or less in this state of suspended animation because what that has to do, what that embryo has to do, in order to be nourished and continue to grow, it has to implant on the inside of the uterine wall because when it does that, it attaches to the mom, and the mom will then be able to feed it through the bloodstream and provide the nutrients it needs to continue to grow into that ultimate baby. And what happens is those eggs do not implant. They kind of stop growing, and it's this term called delayed implantation. So they're more or less in this state of suspended animation where they're fertilized and they're ready to grow, but they don't implant to keep growing. So they more or less kind of hover in the mom's uterus because if you know anything about bears, when they emerge from the den, they can be pretty darn skinny. So throughout the summer, those bears are going to have to put on weight. Now, they're mating late spring, early summer. So a lot of those females that are getting impregnated look like this bear on the screen, which is pretty darn skinny. Now, can you imagine if that bear stays relatively skinny and then goes into the den to give birth? There's going to be major complications, and that female is likely not to survive. So the reason they have what's called this delayed implantation is those eggs will not implant and they will not start growing for a number of months because the body is waiting to see if she's going to pack on the weight. And the goal for every black bear, especially the female black bears, is to put on as much fat as possible before the hibernation. Hibernation, like I was telling you, is extremely tough on the body. And if the female bear is carrying a number of full-grown uh, cubs within her womb, she is not likely not going to survive. So her body literally waits until about November to more or less say, hey, do I have enough fat resources in order to survive not just the hibernation, but to survive the hibernation while I'm pregnant? And so, if her body does have enough fat resources, all those fertilized eggs, it could have been one, two, three, four, sometimes even five. That's really rare though. But as soon as the body recognizes that it's healthy enough or fat enough to survive the hibernation and the pregnancy, then those eggs will implant on the uterine wall sometime in November, and then they'll begin to grow. So instead of having this 9 month time of growing inside the womb, it implants around November. And if you recall, cubs are typically born in late January, early February. So you're looking November, December, Jan you're looking at only about a 3 month time period in which those eggs are growing. So when those bears are eventually born in that January, February time period, they're teeny tiny, only 8 to 12 ounces. And so some of us have been blessed to be able to see these super, super tiny cubs, and they literally fit in the palm of your hand. And you understand that some female bears could be 300 pounds. Like take a prime human female who might weigh anywhere between 100 and 200 pounds, whatever. When they have a baby, that baby is going to be 5 to 10 pounds. And you have a bear that could be twice the size of a human. They should be giving birth to a cub that may be 10 to 20 pounds. But instead, they're giving birth to these itty bitty tiny things because those bears they went through that delayed implantation. So they only grew within her womb for about 3 months. Now she's going to be sleeping for another month or two, waking up occasionally to take care of them. But once they're born and outside of the womb, that little guy will crawl up, find one of her nipples, and latch onto her for weeks on end, continuing to grow. But instead of growing inside the womb, it's getting bigger and stronger, nursing on mom outside the womb. So that is one of those other pretty amazing facts that just shows bears are pretty amazing animals. Besides the hibernation, they have this crazy unique thing called delayed implantation, which allows them, which allows female bears to survive hibernation and give birth at the same time. So sorry for the nerd moment, but that's me. I'm a biologist. I love it. And so I got to impart my knowledge on you. So any questions about delayed implantation?
Daryl, do you know, is it a hormone that signals that
The
it
trigger?
can implant?
Um, that's a good question. I'm not as much a physiologist. I'm more of a behavior person than a physiologist.
Yeah.
So I would imagine it is some hormonal trigger, but it's got to be based on the health of that female, whether or not she has that layer of fat. Michelle asked a question about do any other animals have delayed implantation? Yes, there are a couple of mammals. I'm thinking river otters are one of them. There's a couple of smaller mammals. Bears are actually the largest mammal that utilizes this strategy of delayed implantation, but there are a few others, and it's Michelle primarily found in mammals that hibernate or at least have this downtime in the wintertime. And so it's just this evolutionary adaptation that allows both mother and her offspring to survive these really, really tough times where there's not much food out there. So anyway, I think that's pretty incredible. Not many
Yeah.
people know
I
about that.
I was gonna say, Daryl, I've talked with people about this, and Tori, your question about the hormonal trigger, and in the only thing my physiology background could speak to is HCG, human chorion gonadotropin, triggers progesterone, which like thickens the uterus lining and helps implantation. And in humans, one of the things that a lot of women will know is having adequate body fat supports that hormonal cycle that allows you to trigger that. So the only thing I've hypothesized, I've not proven this, is that a bear with inadequate fat, when its body does prepare for hibernation, inadequate fat would probably reduce its progesterone production. Just like a lot of women would know their cycle fails or gets messed up if you don't have adequate body fat. And so my guess as a
We lost him, but
Yeah. It's
that
great
makes
having Greg
sense.
around. He's a wealth of knowledge as well. There he is.
my internet, there's a little storm going through. You guys hear me?
Yep, you're back. Well, well, he's still
Did you
back.
guys did you guys hear me there?
Yeah, we can hear you now.
Um, okay. So did you hear my hypothesis on the
Yes.
hormonal interaction with the body fat?
Yes.
Yeah, I think
Okay,
that
that's
makes
that's
sense,
all I
Greg.
think it is. I think it. Yeah. Yeah, I think if you're too skinny, your hormones aren't working, and so that whatever that hormone is in bears, if it's BCG, bear choriandric gonadotropin, then that maybe doesn't be then maybe it's not produced, and then there's no progesterone, and then the uterus isn't prepared to accept the embryos, and so that's my guess on it. But we have had some bears have 5 and 6 cubs recently in the area. I don't know if you heard about it, Daryl. There was a mother bear in Asheville, North Carolina, with 6 cubs this year
I've
running
not heard
around.
about that. I knew
Um,
there's a number of instances with five cubs, which is pretty spectacular, but six is pretty crazy. So the one thing I was going to add is if that female is a bit underweight and she's not going to be able to carry as many cubs as she'd like, what her body does, her body reabsorbs those eggs. And so it could reduce the number of eggs. So instead of carrying maybe three or four or even five cubs, if she's not as fat as ideally she'd like to be, she might only give birth to one cub. So that is what is really neat to see, and the data supports it, is that when you have these falls that have lots of food, lots of hard mass, acorns, hickory nuts, like the bears can fatten up adequately because of what nature produces. You will find cubs everywhere. All the females are giving birth to lots and lots of cubs. On the flip side, when you have a massed failure and there's not a lot of natural foods out there, what you're going to find is there are not many cubs born that following spring. And so bear populations can be impacted pretty quick. Like if you have multiple years of bad mass, or if you have multiple years of really good food production, your bear population can respond extremely quickly. And so, pretty neat adaptation that bears have that just wanted to teach you about. So, Tori, I looked at the time and I'm 5 minutes over already.
That's okay. No, this was great. I don't see any other questions in the chat. Um, so I think that's it, but thank you so much, Daryl. Let
Well,
me
I'm not done because
Oh,
I've got
sorry.
I've got a homework assignment for everybody.
Oh, okay.
I was peeking ahead to the next time we meet, and it's going to be a long chapter. I think it's chapter 16, but
Mhm.
it's going to be about a neat story about one of my in-laws and one of the crazy times I went camping with him. Um, and so that story probably would only take 20 or 30 minutes to kind of go through that whole thing. But the homework is I want people to engage in here. And so anyone that has any funny, scary, adventurous type of story that you're willing to share with, bring it and have it ready to talk about next week. I'd love to learn more about some of your experiences instead of me just always telling you about my experiences. I'd love to hear some of the other crazy stuff. And that's a challenge to Tori and Greg as well. Tell me something that was pretty funny or pretty scary or pretty unique to a camping event that you may have had. So that's my homework for everyone. And with that, now I could thank you and tell you that I could see you in a couple weeks.
Awesome. I love it. All right. So everybody, think about that and bring it for next time. Thanks so much, Daryl. Yes, and we're only doing one chapter, but it's longer, chapter 16 in 2 weeks, which
All
is
right.
November. So, all right, everybody. Thank you so much. Thanks, Daryl.
Thanks, Daryl.
Cheers.
Bye.
Bye.